Hello everyone, this is update for August 21, 2023, day 544 of the war, end of the date update, also catch up for August 20th. So I'm gonna start, as you can see from the map. I'm gonna do overview of the strategic developments, and I'm gonna switch to Ukraine after that. So the first one, as you can see from this map, Wagner Group is back in business. So the head of Wagner Group is apparently in sub-Saharan or Sahara region of Africa. I'm not sure where. Could be Mali, could be Niger, could be Burkina Faso, one of these three countries. And this is obviously looks like. I cannot guarantee that, but based on his own statements. And as he said, the Wagner Group is there to, in quotes, liberate people of sub-Saharan Africa from the Western oppression. So what this really means is that another country could be up for grabs in its Guinea. Here, as you can see, it has access to the Atlantic Ocean. And it's probably helping Niger against potential invasion from the neighboring countries, specifically from Nigeria. But the bigger sort of strategic sort of goal, what Russia is trying to achieve here, is basically it's trying to cut off West from natural resources because it controls a lot. And if it controls even more through controlling Africa, really puts West in very, very difficult situation in terms of resources. It stocks up inflation, creates economic problems, and creates division and political division in the West. Europe is going to be especially prone to that because it has virtually no natural resources, or they are being conserved, so they're not being used and so on. So that really create extreme pressure in Europe. And as I said, Russia's strategic goal with all of this is to disunite West. That's a big goal, and in the process make money, obviously. Not without that. So we'll see what's happening, but it's very clear. Wagner mercenaries regrouped and back in business. So I'll provide updates as the things develop. Going back a little bit closer to Ukraine, to Belarus, I mentioned before that Iron Curtain seems to be sort of going down, and U.S. embassy in Belarus told all U.S. citizens to leave immediately. There are one of the reasons is that obviously they cannot go to Ukraine, they cannot go to Poland because the cross points they closed. So there are only, I think, 3 or 4 remaining with Lithuania or Latvia, and apparently they're going to be closed very soon. So that's the reason, as I said, the Iron Curtain is being sort of built, a new 1-0, right in front of our eyes. Now let's talk a little bit about Russia. First of all, there are problems in the sort of Russia, inside Russia, and specifically mentioned before about the shortages of gasoline and increase in price of gasoline. Now the same spread to diesel fuel. So, and specifically how it affects is that some Russian agriculture producers started complaining that they see shortages of diesel fuel, and also it shot up 5% in price in 1 week. Even in Moscow, prices shot up. So there is widespread shortages of basically end product of the crude oil processing, and my speculation that this all goes to export, and Russian government desperately needs US dollars, euros to finance war, to finance the economy, and so all of that, the external export has a total priority over the internal market. And so we'll see how it may affect Russian agriculture production down the road. But at this point, it's just sort of initial sort of signs. It's not end of the world, sort of to say. It's just sort of a more chronicling developments in Russia. Going to back to Russian agriculture. So we all know that this grain deal fell apart. So what's happening right now is essentially two parallel worlds exist. Ukraine is trying to export its grains through the Danube River, through the Danube River Delta. It's much more expensive logistically. It's actually 50% more expensive than sort of normal ways through Black Sea ports. But it still allows, it's still sort of marginally profitable. So that's what Ukrainian government trying to do, and that's why you've seen these attacks on the port infrastructure, logistical infrastructure in the Danube River Delta. But apparently, it's still not totally destroyed. There's still some throughput capacity, but again, it's going to be bottlenecked because they never were built, those ports, to handle so much grain. So it's very clear it's not going to be the same what it used to be. Russia is doing actually their own thing in parallel as well. So they looks like they signed an agreement with Turkey and Qatar to sell Russian grain. So what's going to happen? The Russian grain is going to go to Turkey, where they're going to get processed and re-exported around the world. And Qatar is going to be basically like a sort of a bank or financial center or payment center, essentially, for all of that. So looks like Russia is figuring out its own way how to export its own grain. Also, Russia is in the final stages of negotiation with India to sell 9 million tons of wheat to India, and for about $2 billion. India is quite desperate because they have shortages of rice, to the point that they are willing to pay in US dollars, because if you remember, I mentioned this many times before, they typically pay in Indian rupees, and there's just not much of interest for Russia or for anyone else in India to spend those rupees. And so Russia is effectively losing in that trade, so basically subsidizing Indian economy. But in this situation, India is quite desperate because it's looking into sort of hunger situation and obviously social unrest resulting from it. So Indian government is basically up against the wall, and Russia is potentially sort of solution for that. This also highlights this general situation, how situation with the food is far from I'd say secure around the world. It can easily go into the mild shortages, because, as I said, Ukrainian harvest is going to be very small. So Ukraine is effectively wiped out as exporter from the world grain market. Russia is not going to have a bumper crop. It's not going to be terrible, but it's not going to be bumper crop this year. And then there are places like India and probably more around the world where there are severe problems with the harvest. So we can easily see problems developing sometime in the winter and spring. Now let's actually just gonna switch a little bit to China, and I would say things sort of is escalating in China and Taiwan, as everybody knows. But very interesting detail: China banned import of mango from Taiwan. And this is another sort of like signpost towards the military conflict, right? So first there is sort of verbal exchanges, then you get into the trade war, and then eventually you get into the hot war. So we're clearly going into this situation of the trade war. Obviously, right now it's just mangoes, but the next will be something more important than mangoes. Also, as I mentioned before, China is in really difficult shape economically and financially. Obviously, there is basically real estate bubble collapsing. The export oriented business model is broken. So what's happening is China is effectively forced to sell its U.S. treasuries, which means it's lend money to U.S. government, and in return they got this U.S. treasuries, and they effectively forced to sell those to raise U.S. dollars to finance problems, to support yuan from really cratering, and Japan is in similar boat because they have negative trade balance, which means that they need to sell U.S. Governmental debt, which is again U.S. treasuries. So this really puts a lot of pressure on the U.S. On the interest rates in the U.S. basically. So you have you have sort of pressure from the U.S. central bank, but then you also have this international pressure where two major sort of donors of financiers of the U.S. governmental debt, China and Japan, they effectively no longer will be providing financing to the U.S. And that creates a lot of problems for the U.S. effectively because mentioned before, U.S. is looking into 2 trillion budget deficit for this 2023 fiscal year, which is huge, and effectively this means that in order if U.S. were to continue on this path, there's essentially nobody in the world who's going to be financing that, and that really at that point it really means that this is emitting unbacked credit, and it's really going to be quickly resulting in increase in inflation in the U.S. So, if the way it goes, it's just going to be a very difficult eventual situation financially and obviously economically in the U.S., where the interest rates will have to go higher, or the deficit, the government, the budget deficits in the U.S. will have to be cut, or some kind of combination of the both. And just for the reference, how much U.S. is paying for its interest. So if you do run rate based, I think, on July numbers, U.S. is paying close to about 800 billion per year just for the interest. And I think if I still remember correctly, the revenue collections, U.S. budget is around roughly 4 trillion. So think about this: that about almost quarter goes just to pay interest. So again, this is all a result of this deglobalization, right? So where the world was sort of functioning as one economically, obviously not politically, but economically, and in sort of way, think about the Adam Smith and Ricardo. That model was functioning, which ensured the cheapest price for everything to everybody, or the way we could get the cheapest price. Now that whole model is being broken, and essentially the world is going back to this mercantilism, in the trade barriers and so on, and that really means inflation around the world and economic problems for everyone. This is not just U.S. phenomenon. This is not China. It's going to hit everyone, literally every single person on this planet. It's just going to make living conditions for everyone much worse. This is just, I think, the reason I'm saying this is because there is sort of underappreciation of the positive things that this globalization brought. I'm totally aware of a lot of ugly, terrible things that it's brought, and by that I mean people like Klaus Schwab and so on. That's very clear. It's what I'm trying to say. It's not just black and white. There's obviously black there. There's obviously white there, and sometimes white is really not appreciated. And once we don't have it, we'll realize how great it was. Now let's switch to Ukraine, and let's see what's going on there. I'm gonna walk through in a clockwise fashion, starting from very north. So the situation along the state border is fairly stable, actually fairly quiet. Nothing major going on. Now let's jump to the North Lugansk front line. Things here also quiet. Even the fighting in this in this forest is near Kremina is basically is non-essential. There's also false information being spread by Russian propaganda sources that Russian forces captured village northeast of Kupiansk. So basically, unfortunately, the map it's not big enough, but essentially it's about 10 kilometers northeast of Kupiansk. It's called Sinkivka, which is not true actually. That's actually false information that's being spread by Russian resources. Otherwise, the situation is so far fairly stable on this front line. Now let's move to the North Donbass. Northern sector is also very quiet. Really not much going on at all. In the southern sector, there's this fighting that's still ongoing around Klishchiivka, where Ukrainian forces cannot sort of make the final push to liberate this village, and Russian forces are fiercely counterattacking. So it's basically pull-push. And the status quo remains essential, where this village is really not controlled effectively by either side, and the fighting continues. But again, this is not any kind of major offensive. This is just a local tactical fighting for one village, and once Ukrainian forces liberate this village, it will totally not change anything. Things from a big picture perspective will be road to nowhere essentially. Now let's move to the central Donbass front line. Things here actually also much quieter, and just overall observations, things are quieter. It's either both sides are extremely exhausted, and the fighting is really sort of, how would say, the fire exhausts itself naturally, or there is some preparation for some major offensive at this time, maybe Russian side, but I don't have very clear signs that that's imminent or coming soon or anything. Just observation that things are getting much more quieter on the front line, generally speaking. So again, there's just this fighting, Russian attacks towards Marinka, which as always don't go anywhere. Now let's look at Zaporizhya front line. And so here, Ukrainian forces finally managed to squeeze Russian forces out of the village Robotyne, and also push a little bit Russian forces to the east of Robotyne, south of Malatok Machka. So this is again not any kind of decisive breakthrough, no any major offensives. It's again tactical fighting, squeeze, like similar to World War One, where there could be months of fighting for some village, and a lot of people will die and a lot of equipment destroyed for just really nothing essentially. So again, road to nowhere, just squeezing Russian forces out of another village. There is another village south, so as you can see, Prokopivka. There will be more. The way it's done by Ukrainian army, it's basically it's not possible to achieve anything, and in my view, it actually leads quicker to disaster for Ukraine, because Ukraine expends the most precious resources. I said before, it's people, because the most potent weapon is person, not actual hardware. It's actually people. That's the most dangerous weapon of all, and Ukraine is losing the best people as we speak, and already lost significant majority of those people. So again, this is wasteful use of resource if we just talk from very sort of strategic perspective, and it's just unfortunate. And then also there are attacks, Ukrainian attacks south of Zaporizhya towards Staromlynivka, but again, that's again the squeeze approach continues, and again, Ukrainian forces may take Staromlynivka eventually after probably months of fighting, but again, it just doesn't lead to anything, to any decisive results. And then let's look at the situation along the Dnipro River. Things here are totally quiet. No attempts by either side to sort of change the situation. Actually forgot to mention about F-16 fighters that Ukraine seemingly getting. First of all, the number is in total is going to be, I think, like 60. Out of those 60, Ukraine will see in 2023, I think 10 plus minus maybe 12, which is not going to change anything at all. If I would compare F-16, it's basically slightly worse version of Su-35. Russia has at least 100 of Su-35, and I said before, MiG-31, Russia has at least 200 of those, and those are definitely much better than F-16. So again, it's just not gonna create a meaningful difference in any shape or form. In this point, I believe this is just propaganda attempts by inept Ukrainian political top that's essentially effectively becoming naked, and the incompetence becoming more and more clear and apparent to anyone. So they just try to grasp to anything, whatever. Then there'll be new Wunderwaffe coming. Just wait, sort of similar to how the Nazi Germany did in 1945. Just wait, something new coming, and the propaganda is working. So this is the same kind of pattern, unfortunately. And as I said many times before, the Ukrainian political leadership is completely incompetent, inept, and is actually danger for Ukrainian survival. That's how I'll best describe what it is. So again, this F-16, and by the way, in terms of the versions, it looks like it's just block 2530, which is really not even the latest and greatest. So the latest is block 70. So as you can see, the block 2530, it's essentially close to the original, which is block 10 and 20. So they are not even terribly up to date, so which actually puts them even in the worst sort of comparison relative to Su-35 and MiG-31. And also want to add that the cost to fly these airplanes is very high. It's around like $20,000 per hour, which is obviously much more expensive than not all, but Soviet airplanes and Russian airplanes. So what this really means is it will become even more expensive for the West to support Ukraine. So strategically, it's in a way bad decision because uh, the cost to financial cost to support Ukraine is going to skyrocket basically just from using these airplanes, and these airplanes will not change anything on the battlefield. Just too few. It's not the kind of airplane that really can, in small quantity, gain air superiority over the battlefield, or just in general even cover Ukraine. Uh, what would have been much better use is to supply many more air defense systems. That would go much further and would be much better for Ukraine than this. Um, I would call them expensive toys. That's just my comment on this F-16. And also, actually, if I forgot to mention, in terms of the this Zaporizhya front line, and there's a lot of sort of speculation why the this so-called offensive, which really wasn't really offensive from a textbook perspective, why it's failing, and and there are a lot of sort of I would say bogus explanations, such as this Russian ground attack helicopters, like such as Ka-52. That's not the case. 90% of the damage being done really by anti-tank missiles. That's what's really killing the, for the most part, equipment. Obviously artillery, and Russia has old-fashioned Soviet artillery. It's no match to what Ukraine has right now from the West, but it's still being able to use that. And so that's really, and so this goes back to the situation in Ukrainian army, where the reconnaissance is not there, because that's the whole point of reconnaissance, is to detect minefields, to detect anti-tank missiles, and the, I don't know how you call them, the basically it's not man-held, but just Soviet. Well, it's also Russia improved them, but on a tripod, you've probably seen them quite a bit. So that's really what's sort of result, like how Russia stops. And by the way, Russia already developed a solution for the cluster munitions. So they just put the wood planks with a little bit thin layer of the ground over the trenches, and it protects sufficiently against the cluster munitions. So effectively, the efficiency of those cluster munitions also significantly reduced. I'm not saying it's perfect everywhere. It's not, obviously. There is still a lot of damage done, so people, it's a sort of in a way natural selection, right? Those who lazy get killed, those who decide to work and protect themselves survive. So this is how it works in this case. But nevertheless, there is a solution, and it's cheap, and only the question of desire of your own desire to work, to use your own physical force to protect yourself. And there's enough people who care about their life on the Russian side. So this is in a nutshell what's going on. Thanks for watching, and until next time, bye bye.